Should Biden be given more praise for his significant climate legislation? Last week, President Biden addressed the media to mark the first anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, which he referred to as the largest investment in clean energy and climate action ever. After months of talks among Democrats, the IRA narrowly passed the Senate in August of last year. The legislation was really a broad collection of programs intended to accelerate the nation's transition to green energy through investments and tax incentives, despite the fact that the bill's name specifically mentioned the then-rising inflation. A few non-climate items were also added, such as guidelines to reduce the price of prescription medications and more financing in the billions for the Internal Revenue Service. While even the president concedes that the IRA shouldn't be credited for falling inflation, the bill has already helped drive more than $100 billion into green energy production and created more than 170,000 clean energy jobs, many of them in Republican parts of the country. The White House argues that this is just a preview of the IRA's full impact, which won't be realized for several years. One estimate predicted that the bill could result in as much as $1.2 trillion in green energy spending over the next 10 years. Yet despite these massive investments, voters aren't giving Biden credit for leading the effort to make the bill a reality. More than half of Americans disapprove of his handling of climate change, and a strong majority say they know little or nothing about what the Inflation Reduction Act has done, according to a recent Washington Post University of Maryland poll. Why there's debate? Many political analysts say that stuffing a bunch of individually popular initiatives into a single bill created a piece of legislation too complicated for voters to wrap their heads around. The slow process of launching major energy projects also means that many Americans haven't yet seen the impact of the IRA in their communities. But others say Biden's real problem is that he's taking the wrong approach to climate change in the first place. Republicans argue that the IRA is far too large and will end up wasting extraordinary amounts of taxpayer money by imposing the Democrats' green agenda on the country. Many progressives, on the other hand, say climate-minded voters are disappointed that the bill isn't nearly big enough and that Biden has undermined his own case by approving fossil fuel projects throughout his presidency. What's next? Biden's effort to draw more attention to the IRA's benefits is part of a larger effort to change voters' minds about his stewardship of the economy, which have remained stubbornly low despite persistent growth and tumbling inflation. Convincing Americans that Bidenomics is working will likely be a core focus for the president throughout his re-election campaign. Perspectives. Most Americans can't make sense of such a massive and complex bill. I think part of the issue is they have to cram so many things in these giant bills, to get everybody on board and something for everyone to get passed. So it's really hard for the public to wrap their head around. It's very, very tricky when it's hard to know what's in it. Nova Sappho, Marketplace. Americans aren't seeing the effects in their everyday lives. While the Inflation Reduction Act is bringing dramatic savings to Medicare recipients, and offers rebates and tax credits to consumers for energy-saving home improvements and electric vehicle purchases, nothing in it really addresses the day-to-day expenses most Americans incur, like groceries and gas. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, to HuffPost. The IRA isn't remotely enough to change our climate trajectory. It left the U.S. with no realistic path toward meeting its stated goal of zeroing carbon emissions by 2050. At the rate we're still pumping planet-heating carbon into the atmosphere, today's heat waves could come to seem downright pleasant. Mark Gongloff, Bloomberg. The IRA is bad policy and voters know it. Even if you give the bill the most charitable take possible, it's just throwing money at failed programs and wasted resources. Alex Salter, economist at Texas Tech University, to Washington Times. The president has repeatedly undercut his own climate message. Biden has also faced the ire of climate progressives for somewhat undercutting his landmark moment with an aggressive giveaway of oil and gas drilling leases on public land, and for incentivizing the use of technologies such as carbon capture that have been criticized as an unproven distraction at a time when the world is baking under record heat waves. Oliver Millman, Guardian. Voters will begin to appreciate the IRA once the projects it's funding get off the ground. I think, over the long run, a lot of these Republican skeptics, they're going to start to see jobs in their district, investments. And I think they're going to come along with the clean energy technologies of the 21st century. Leah Stokes, UC Santa Barbara Professor of Environmental Politics, to PBS NewsHour. The media has mostly ignored the actual impact of the IRA. I've covered a lot of policy fights, and a huge problem in how policy coverage is done is there is all this attention to the fight to pass a bill, the Affordable Care Act, the Trump tax cuts, the Inflation Reduction Act. And then the bill passes. And if the fight stops, attention just drops off a cliff. Ezra Klein, New York Times.